That's good. I'm happy.
All right. Good. All right. So we're recording? Y'all, we're good? Okay. Thank you. The October 18th, 2022 board meeting for CRTPA. Good to see everyone today. Are there any, well, we need roll call?
Yes.
Yes.
Commissioner Barfield.
Here.
Commissioner Messerschmidt.
Here.
Commissioner Dozier.
Here.
Commissioner Minor.
Here.
Commissioner Williams-Cox.
Here.
Commissioner, thank you.
Commissioner? Who?
That's
Thank you.
everybody.
That's everybody. Okay, we got everybody. Well, you'll forgive me real quick. Do we have a new member?
Not as of yet.
Okay.
As I think most of you know, Dr. V. BCA retired from the Gaston County Commission a couple of months ago and has been replaced with Commissioner Eric Henson.
Replaced with who?
Eric Henson.
Okay.
And I will introduce Ronnie Shelley from Star Metro. I guess that's who you thought.
Well, I didn't think you were a new member running. I actually was thinking about Dr. V, but I was then going to ask you, introduction of guests was next. So I looked at you, Ronnie, but I actually meant, yes, Dr. V. I will just say for Commissioner Henson, he has been very active in Florida Association of Counties. So we appreciate Dr. V's long service to the board, but we'll be happy to welcome Commissioner Henson. Yes. Okay.
And we do have a quorum now,
Now we
correct?
have quorum. Okay.
Quorum now?
Mr. Allen, welcome. So now, introduction of any guests and then agenda modifications?
I believe we got everybody. And at this point, we have no amendments to the agenda, though we may have to move some things around. We have two commissioners that need to leave at 2:30 and 3:25. So once we get into the action, we may have to move a couple of things around, get those approved before they leave.
All
Should
right.
be good.
Okay. So the next item, public comment on non-agenda items. Do we have any?
We do not have any speaker cards.
No
correct?
speakers.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you both, I should. Consent agenda. Any changes, anything like that, or could we have a motion for consent?
Move consent.
Second. Commissioner Minor moves. Commissioner Williams-Cox, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. And we had none pulled for discussion. So now moving on to the FY 23 to 27 TIP amendments. Greg?
Suzanne's going to give you an overview of the proposed amendments, and as you'll recall, this is a roll call vote for this item. Yeah, and we can just do those on one roll call.
Just one roll call for all of the amendments.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, okay. Thank you. Suzanne?
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Chair and Commissioners. Presenting to you Transportation Improvement Program amendments. So some of these amendments, if we can go to the next slide, please. Some of these amendments are a result of additional funding coming to us from the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriation. There's two TIP amendments, one for Big Bend Transit. It provides $884,126 for operating, and that can be used, even though it's an amendment into the Gadsden County section of the TIP, it is actually funds that can be used in Gadsden County and in Jefferson County, because Big Bend services both. And then for Star Metro, they've received $309,228 in operating funds. We have also been requested to amend the TIP, and the FDOT will amend the work program to include funding for two bridges in Gaston County. These are critical projects. The High Bridge Road project, it's a little over $19 million, and the Hannah Mill Pond Bridge replacement project, it's almost $14 million. These projects will be initiated this year, and construction is in fiscal year 26 or fiscal year 27. We have another project that was added, and this is one of our priorities. It was the SU funding for US 90 for the trail, the multi-use trail where you just finished the feasibility study. FDOT has put the funding on this segment from the Leon County line to Monticello. So they put $810,000, and that is our SU funding. And then finally, you'll see there's a request to delete a project. And that was the design funding for the Monticello Trail extension. In essence, we have just flipped this money from the Monticello Trail to the US 90 for the PD&E. And then they've added a little additional funding to make sure they could complete that. So I am requesting approval of these amendments, and is,
Move to approve.
Second.
and as Greg had said, it was as a roll call vote. And I just want to note, there's some additional information in your folder that Greg may speak to in the packet. It was not in the packet, it's on the presentation. Next slide, please. And it has to do with some information on increase in funding.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on this quickly. The members of the executive committee recall back in August, we talked about the amendment to the project to add some traffic operations improvements up at Thomasville Road and I-10. We kind of joked at the time, we actually got 3 different cost estimates in the same week for that project. It went from about 10 million to, I think that week we landed at 13 million. We've since got another amendment that's pushing it up to 16 million. So I wanted to give a little bit of context to that. So I asked the department to give us an idea of some of the increases in the unit cost that they're seeing, and that's what's up here. And unfortunately, this display has split the increase right down the middle. But you can see in some areas, especially with concrete, asphalt, we're seeing 600% increases over June of 2021, 400% or so in asphalt and costs like that. So, and I'll pass this on to all of you just so you have it for reference. But we're all have been hearing about cost increases and things like that. But I want to just give you a little bit of context as to what that looks like when you're actually putting together, particularly a construction project.
Thank you.
That is very helpful. So you'll email
Yes, ma'am.
that to the board. Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Mr. Slade, based on your experience, these are really concerning price increases. Based on your experience, with similar price increases in past years, do you see a point where this might start to decline over time? How sticky are these prices?
I would certainly hope so. I mean, the last time we saw price increases like this was the early 2000s during the building boom. They went down just as quickly, just about as they increased. I would think over time these will come down. Where they land, I don't know. I mean, we're hearing different stories. Aggregate's hard to get, things like that for asphalt. I certainly hope that they start to come down. Some of the comments we've heard from the department is the money from the new BIL, bipartisan infrastructure law, is still coming into play, and they don't want to use that for cost increases, but I think it's going to be extremely difficult not to. Going back to the I-10 project, when it was originally designed about 2 years ago, the cost estimate on that was around $6.5 million. So you're looking at a 200+% in 2 years increase on that. But I generally think they will come back down. The question is where the new base will be once things sort of stabilize.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions there? This may sound a little left field, Brian. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but are there any alternative materials that FDOT is looking at this point? And I ask this question specifically, and I'm going back many years now, but there's been some conversations about recycling. And we know there's challenges, for example, with glass recycling. And I believe there was a pilot project, Tampa, St. Pete area years ago that crushed glass and added it to the asphalt aggregate. I don't know if that one's specific, but do you know of any work to think about onshoring or reducing the cost of some of these materials that FDOT would accept?
I'm not aware of any that are what I'll call production ready, just due to the sheer volume that we need. It's hard to bring something to market that quick that will have an impact statewide. So unfortunately, we are suffering through this, and I don't see a quick fix with any other alternate materials.
And the lag time, I mean, the time to bring it to market and the great, that would be a concern. But since we see this cycle happen over time, thinking about onshoring, thinking about sourcing some of that material closer to home might be something interesting. So, okay, thank you. Welcome,
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Richardson. Thank you. We just got started, first item, so,
Oh,
yes,
good.
yes.
I
We just
had a
had
dental
quorum, so we got
appointment, and I
quorum.
didn't think it was going to last as long as it did.
No problem.
Apologize for-
Thank you. All right, so we had a motion on this?
And a second.
And a second. Any other discussion? All right, we'll go to a roll call vote. Thank you, Suzanne.
Commissioner Barfield,
Aye.
Commissioner Allen,
Aye.
Commissioner Messerschmidt,
Aye.
Commissioner Dozier,
Aye.
Commissioner Minor,
Aye.
Commissioner Richardson,
Aye.
and Commissioner Williams Cobbs,
Aye.
and Commissioner Allen. Did I say Commissioner Allen? You did.
Yes.
Thank you. Unanimously passed.
All right. We're good, Yolanda?
Yes, unanimously passed.
Okay. Forgive me for that sidebar there. So because folks have to leave a bit early, Greg was just suggesting that we jump to items D, E, and F. That would be 7, D, E, and F first, and then we will go back to A, B, and C. If there's no objections to that, I'll move forward with that change. Okay. So item D is the CRTPA travel policy.
Yes, ma'am. This is just an update to our current travel policy. Suzanne, do you want to take this?
Next slide, please. There are 3 items that, again, the reason we updated we have actually adopting a CRTPA travel policy. In reviewing our staff services agreement, Section 7 says that we will conduct and process all travel according to our policy. We did not have a set policy. We've always followed the City of Tallahassee's guidelines. And we will still do that because 95% of this policy is verbatim from the City of Tallahassee's. We only changed the things regarding administration, approval, sort of the very beginning processing part of it. In addition, there is the resolution for adopting this travel policy will satisfy the requirements of Section 112.0906 of Florida statutes. The MPOs can adopt their own travel rates different from the travel rates established by the state, but it must be adopted by resolution. The CRTPA did adopt these a few years ago, so we're simply updating that and confirming it. And these travel rates are also consistent with the City of Tallahassee's policy because they use the federal GSA rates. And that's the highlights of why we're doing this. Any questions?
Question?
Okay.
Yes, I'm sorry, Commissioner Williams-Cox.
Thank you. My question would be, since it's following the City of Tallahassee, are you going to couple it so that if there are changes with the policy, the city's policy, that it would also cause change in your policy?
Yes, we would, and there is, the policy calls for an annual review.
Right.
So,
Right.
Ms. Williams, Attorney Williams.
Yeah.
Okay. Commissioner, because the CRTPA is an independent body, it has to make its own determination as to the policy. So as Suzanne has mentioned, they will monitor the changes by the city, review, and then make recommendations back to the board.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you both. Any other questions? All right, do we have a motion?
So moved, Madam Chair.
Second.
Commissioner Richardson, Commissioner Williams-Cox, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. Moving on to the CRTPA fiscal year 23 budget.
And we'll continue with the Suzanne show.
thank you very much. Can we get to the next slide, please? And forgive me, I actually walked up without the wrong glasses, so I'm going to speak from my notes here. I believe I've got the right stuff. So the budget this year, we did see an increase in some,
Good man, Jack.
thank you, Jack.
Hold on a second, Suzanne. He's got you covered.
He's gonna look out for
I
you.
just can't get that bifocals things down.
I don't think everyone in the room, but I could bet most of us in the room understand the challenges, so.
Very nice. I can actually read that screen. So the budget this year, there is an increase over last year in some categories. In the staff report, it details that. The biggest category, of course, that you see for our budget is 1.86 million. It is for project and planning. So that also, it's called uncategorized consultant services, professional services. That would also include our WCOT and our audit. So if you want to go back to, can you go to the next slide? So here is a breakdown of that budget of the 1.86. We are funding the projects you see there, including an amendment into the UPWP, which was approved by the executive committee as it was time sensitive. And the safety action plan that was the item. Also funding the studies for the 267 trail, the freight study, which will be, and the telecommute study, which are planned to begin sometime after the new year. And then the CMP, which is ongoing and you will hear about later today, and also the Tallahassee to Havana Trail. There is funding in reserve, so that money that is not allocated to a project or a consultant task at this time would require a UPWP amendment. So any changes to that budget will come back to the board for approval. And again, this will be, we'll identify perhaps some projects after the retreat in January. And then back to the previous slide, sorry to flip back and forth. The second largest category is staff personnel. Health benefits increased this year, pension benefits increased, and as well as we went with the raises that the City of Tallahassee provided. So our increase this year went up to $726,000. From last year, it was about $680,000. And then staff services has actually remains fairly the same. In some areas, it went down. We did have an increase, though, on our environmental charge because we have moved into our offices. So that will remain fairly consistent for the future now. That is sort of our base number that we can count on for staff services. And then our operating at $228,000. There are some areas that we added additional funds to based upon our new offices, which will go down next year. So we added a little bit of money for office equipment and supplies. And then we also would like to do some enhanced advertising. So we increased our advertising budget to $10,000. We may not use all of that, but we would like the opportunity to really provide more engagement and more public involvement. So that was sitting there as a reserve if we can do that. Any questions?
Any questions on the budget?
So we're requesting approval.
Move acceptance of the recommendation.
Thank you. Okay, we have a motion and a second. I was simply going to say that, I mean, this was a discussion at the executive committee meeting. We went through our audit, and I want to compliment our CRTPA staff and the city staff they work with for really working so hard over the years to make sure we're not just increasing funding, but how they present things, making sure we're tying up some loose ends and correcting some things of the past. And we are in a really good position right now. So appreciate all of you. Thank you. All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, good. So we are moving right along. We will go to item 7F, FY 23-24 Unified Work Plan,
Yes,
correct?
ma'am, and this will be a UPWP amendment to add the Safe Streets for All Safety Action Plan. And Suzanne, were you doing anything else? I know Jack's got a couple of things.
We both are. I'm just
Okay.
going to quickly say that this was a time-sensitive amendment that was presented to the executive committee, and it was approved by the executive committee, but we wanted to make sure to bring it back to the board for your approval as well, and then to explain what the project is and what this funding is for. And now I'll turn it over to Jack for that.
Thank you, Suzanne. With us today is Richard Barr from Kimley Horn. They are the consultants that are going to be helping us with the action plan. So quickly, we've seen a number of grant opportunities coming out of the bilateral infrastructure law for transportation opportunities, and this is one of them in terms of safety. It's got two components to it. It's got an action plan grant that you can apply for, as well as an infrastructure grant that you can apply for. Due to the timing of the way things that are implemented and provided to potential people who would be receiving the grant money for the action plan, that wouldn't occur till January, potentially them getting the money till March, with potentially hiring someone by September. By September, we're allowed to submit infrastructure grants. So what we opted to do instead was to provide or get the action plan underway utilizing our own funds to do that, and having our partners, be the region be a partner into all that activity. And then we would be able to have the project done, the action plan done by May, June of next year. That will give the partners an opportunity to have about 3 months to fill out grant applications for the infrastructure. Again, well, I didn't say this yet, but the grant is a 5-year grant with $1 billion a year, $400 million going towards the action plan side of things, and $600 million go to the infrastructure side. So the quicker you can get your action plan done, the better your opportunities are to have that infrastructure grant applied for. It can be applied for by any of the local governments, and there are some stipulations. And we don't want to go into the detail right now. We just wanted to outlay what we were doing in terms of applying, taking the action plan and moving it forward before we have that opportunity, and waiting for everybody else to see if they're getting money or not. We went ahead and funded that now. And then again, by September of next year, they'll have the ability to go ahead and put in their applications for the infrastructure. So with that, Richard Barr is here to do a brief presentation, and it's only about 4 or 5 slides, so we should be done in just a couple minutes.
Good afternoon. Richard Barr with Kimley Horn. Great to be here. What a great opportunity to bring in some safety funds, grant dollars into the 4-county region, the RTPA. So are you running this, or am I?
You can just have them forward.
Okay, sorry. So what is a Safe Streets for All action plan? It's a comprehensive look at safety. The action plan is aimed at preventing and significantly reducing roadway fatalities and serious injuries for all users. So what's included into this action plan? It's working with our already established CTST, the community safety teams that are in the 4 counties. It's working with them on goal setting and projects. Obviously, there's a safety analysis component to this, comprehensive analysis done. Engagement and collaboration. There's going to be outreach to all the counties. There's going to be collaboration with identifying projects with the 4-county region. Also with the public, general public. We will be going out into the public and getting input from that, all the citizens. There's also an equity part of this, to make sure that we have projects that are throughout all the 4-county region, as well as looking at projects for the underserved areas. We'll be looking also possibly at policy and process changes related to safety. And then, of course, we'll be identifying projects with a lot of input from the 4-county region. Next slide. So what are the goals? Obviously, safety is a big goal of this project and an undertaking. These goals here are part of your region mobility plan goals. So we want to be consistent with everything that the CRTPA is doing. So what's coming up in the next few months? We've already been out to the CTSTs for 2 of the areas in October, the last couple of weeks, and we'll be going out to the other CTSTs, safety teams. We'll be doing the safety and equity analysis over the next couple of months. We'll be collecting projects from each of the counties this month. And then we'll be at the Winter Festival in December to be there, get input. We've done that before on projects and get a lot of, there's big crowds down there, and think we can get some good input at that festival. So Jack said it's going to be short, so I'll be glad to answer any questions, or Jack will be glad to answer questions as well.
All right. Thank you, Richard, as always. Yes, ma'am. Commissioner Williams-Cox.
Thank you for this. And for the locations that you will be going to gather information, you open to some other recommendations as well?
Yes, certainly.
Okay. Next week is FAMU's homecoming. There will be a lot of activities happening in the city of Tallahassee, but most importantly, there's a parade that happens near on campus, on the campus, that you might be interested in getting some input or information from there as well, because there is intersection there, as well as a lot of activity going on Perry Street will be next weekend as well. So just some of the other places maybe off of the beaten path or downtown to gather information. Just want to offer that.
Thank you.
Madam Chair?
Yes, sir. I'm sorry. I was coming back around to you, Commissioner Richardson.
Okay.
Go right ahead. I looked at that side first.
Just real quickly, what are the safety considerations or safety issues that will be taken into consideration to determine the projects?
Well, there's going to be a wide variety. It's really up to the local agency, local counties to come up with their list of projects. I mean, a typical safety study is looking at crash data over the last 5 years. This is going to be more encompassing than that. It's looking at safety area, where we think we can avoid some safety issues that are out there today, not just based on crashes, but looking for input from county staffs, from citizens, et cetera.
Madam Chair,
Please, go
just a quick follow-up. I'm sorry, I just left a dental appointment. I'm babbling. Will we collaborate with the public school district and maybe the universities to determine some areas?
Yes, we've talked about that.
Okay.
Again, there's some flexibility of what we're doing here. And yeah, we have talked about going out to those groups.
Okay. And just finally, I would suggest too, maybe the neighborhood associations, working with our Parks, Recreation, and Neighborhood Affairs Department in both the city and county, maybe to get some recommendations from the neighborhood association.
Good idea.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Commissioners,
Thank
to
you.
follow up
Greg?
on that, we've talked about kind of 2 pathways, more or less, for different types of projects. One of those being, if, as Richard mentioned, there's crash data that identifies a problem in a particular location, that would be one path. The other would be, and I'll use the City of Tallahassee has their past project list, and just using an example from that, Easterwood Road, going through Tom Brown Park, that's been identified for sidewalks, bike lanes, and things like that. So that would be the other sort of type of project we're looking at, is it may not necessarily address a specific safety issue, but it's a project that would make the environment safer for pedestrians and cyclists and things like that. So those are kind of the two-pronged approach we're looking at it as we develop the projects. I mean, all in all, I don't know that we see a lot of new projects that haven't been identified before coming out of this. It's more consolidating what the 4 counties, the City of Tallahassee has in their project lists. One of the things we have to do is the plan has to include a prioritized list of projects, but we're going to avoid prioritizing them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We just don't think it's our place to prioritize one jurisdiction's projects over another. But what we will have is similar to what we did in the long-range plan and the bike ped plan. We'll have tiers. Tier 1 projects may have 15 or 20 projects. So when the locals apply, they can identify it as a Tier 1 priority that was part of the safety action.
Thank you. Great.
Thank you. Greg, I think you just answered. I'm not seeing any other questions. If anyone else has something. You just answered my question. I wanted to clarify that this is an opportunity for each individual county to apply for these funds, but cities as well, or is it
Yes.
based? Yeah, so cities or counties can apply. And CRTPA will be there to assist any county or city that may need guidance in this application?
Yes, ma'am. One of the issues that's been identified, we've talked about, has been identified in DOT central office. Of course, these are federal funds, so local governments have to be what are called local agency program or LAP certified. Leon County and the City of Tallahassee have been LAP certified for years. Gadsden County, I think they've gone to a per project LAP certification. Jefferson County and Wakulla County have not been LAP certified. We've had some conversation with them in general terms about the possibility of them being LAP certified. So there are some program hurdles once we get through the plan to see what a lot of the local jurisdictions want to do. So that will be something, and we've had some conversations actually with the RPC about that as well.
I thought this overlapped with previous conversations about the certification, and if a county is certified, the municipality falls under that county certification, or do they have to get?
It depends, no.
Okay.
In the case of, and a lot of times it depends on the size of the local government. So the City of Tallahassee has their own LAP certification, and Leon County has their own as well.
So you're already working on this, we've already started conversations with the Planning Council, but just making sure that all our city and county governments are aware that that may be a time-consuming process as well to get that certification if they want to seek that or to, resolve any issues prior to being able to apply for the grants.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, good. Just wanted to make sure that was out there so that we're all working the same path. Okay. Anything else for sure? You're good?
Good.
Okay. Seeing no other questions, we need a vote on this, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Is there a motion?
Move option 1 as recommended by staff, Madam Chair.
I'll second.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you, Commissioner Weiner, Commissioner Richardson. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Good. Well, we're heading back to the top of the agenda, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
So, or not the top of the agenda, but the beginning of section
7A.
7. So 7A, the SIS cost feasibility plan update.
Ma'am, I'd like to introduce Olin Pettis from District 3, and he's going to give us an update on the Strategic Intermodal System Cost Feasible Plan update.
Welcome, Mr. Pettis.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners. I'm Olin Pettis with the Florida Department of Transportation out of the Planning Office in District 3. Here to talk to you today about the Long Range Cost Feasible Plan, often called the CFP. If you could, hold your questions until the end of the presentation. It's a brief 10 or 11 slides, so we'll be able to progress pretty quickly. So the CFP, the purpose of the CFP, it fulfills the following key purposes and ensures consistency with the goals of the Department's transportation plan and the objectives of the CIS policy plan. It also evaluates the statewide and local needs in light of projected future revenues to determine the most strategic use of our CIS funds. It also contributes to our CIS's overall long-range planning efforts in the form of a phased plan for cost-feasible improvements, and it also meets our statutory requirements as set aside in Chapter 33964. On the next slide here, you see the CIS planning process. On the left there, it talks about the framework for the planning process of programming and implementation of the projects and how it supports the effective investments of our limited transportation funds. On the right here, we have a flow chart that kind of helps to dive into a little bit deeper on the next slide, but as you can see how it's the tiered down approach, starting with our transportation plan into the policy plan, and then moving into different eligibility of projects as well as our system designations, and then gets us into our unfunded needs, And then the next three right there is what's kind of related to our CIS funding strategy that's listed, as well as moving into a project letting. So we have our long-range plan there with a cost feasible plan moving into our first and second 5 in the adopted work program. On the next slide here, you can see, as I talked about, going into a little more detail, looking at the lower portion there, where we start to talk about the first, second 5, and all in part of that funding strategy. Then we move into where our cost feasible plan is considered. That's the years that are financially feasible for fiscal years 11 through 25. So all the projects that are identified within the CIS strategy are considered financially feasible for implementation within that the next 25-year period. And at a minimum, these projects need to be on the board's long-range transportation plan in order to make its way to our cost feasible plans. Biggest things kind of take away from here would be, you know, the long-range transportation plan needs to be in your TPO's unfunded needs plan for your plan years of 1 through 20. And also multimodal needs plan if there's anything deemed not feasible within that 25-year plan. So the 2050 CIS cost feasible plan that we'll be looking at will be, and when it's complete, it will contain projects that have been deferred from previous work program cycles and development cycles, projects that are remaining from the existing CIS 2045 cost feasible plan, and then we'll also be looking at new projects that will be identified by the MPOs, the DOT district, executive management as priorities to move forward. And then looking at the statewide cost feasible plan process, as you can see here, it's kind of a ever-flowing type process that starts through with our statewide priorities, moving into the district priorities and our MPO priorities, and all of that kind of channels back through and filters back up to our statewide priority and needs that are listed there. So we receive the input from everyone throughout that process. The statewide CIS version is then used by the districts and the MPOs to help develop the long-range transportation plans through that as well. So looking at stakeholder input and involvement, there's a few good takeaways from this. This is a really important slide. So being able to review the existing CIS 2045 cost feasible plan to ensure that the projects reflect your current and future stakeholder priorities. We also need to review our existing TPO LRTP needs plan to ensure and see if new projects should be added or potentially some should be taken off from that. And then coordinate with your district office here in District 3. And then also coordination with any adjacent counties or MPOs that may be there to make sure your plans are matching up with any needs or plans that they would have as well. So this is kind of just looking at some of the MPO adoption dates for the long-range transportation plans. As you can see here for the CRTPA, 2045 was adopted in November 23rd of 2020, and we were projected out 5 years to November 23rd of 25 for the next adoption of the 2050 long-range transportation plan. And on this development schedule that's proposed, as you can tell, looking at this cycle and the graph that's there, we're kind of in that bottom middle section of phase 4, looking at the process. So really moving forward into looking for the district to submit our cost feasible plan. We've submitted our first review to central office of that. We utilize the priorities that are submitted from the TPO staff that are currently existing to help develop that, as well as some other outreach. And there will be some timeline here at the end of the year for you guys to make sure you look over that 2045 and your long-range transportation plan to see if there's anything additional that needs to come in or come out of that plan. We still have a little bit of time to work that into the system between now and somewhere within that February range, January-February range within the next fiscal year of 2020 or physical year of 2023. So once again, just to kind of go back to, on that last slide, a key thing with that is those dates are kind of relative dates, so they are target dates, so they're subject to move. So none of that is set in stone if you don't meet it by the certain date. So just know that those dates are target dates, and there's a lot of things both on the department statewide side as well as TPO side that could change some of those, those dates or those deliverables. So going back to kind of this slide is some key takeaways with the stakeholder input and our involvement that's needed, just to really drive home the review of our existing CIS 2045 cost feasible plan to ensure that the projects reflected currently and future stakeholder priorities are met. Then also reviewing the existing TPO long-range transportation plan needs plan to see if any new projects should be added, like I mentioned, to the 2050 cost feasible. And then once again, coordination with district staff as well as, we can coordinate that information to our statewide leaders, and then any adjacent MPOs or counties to make sure everything is matched up with their plans. So with that, that takes me to kind of the end of the presentation. At this time, if there's any questions.
Any questions? Yes, sir.
Just a very quick question. As we plan for future transportation needs, is it also including modes of the change in modes of transportation? And what I'm addressing specifically would be electronic vehicles and charging stations along the routes. Is all of that, will that be taken into consideration as we move forward and get further and further away from the use of fossil fuel vehicles?
Yes, sir. The department's currently looking at that. We actually have a statewide study that's going on that's just been kicked off in the last few months, where the department has selected a consultant firm on a statewide level to do an analysis of charging stations and locations for that along the corridor. So we do have a separate effort for that, but yes, that is something that would be looked at and considered, within the cost feasible plan. Not necessarily for looking at funding of those particular resources, but how those
coordinated
items are used. So it kind of would go hand.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Williams-Cox.
And of course, I'm going to mention rail. Well, that is.
Yeah,
Is that included? Want to make sure that it is included to confirm that that's a part of the transportation plan going forward.
Yeah, looking at that from the perspective of what we're looking at in our CIS cost feasible plan, it's mainly focusing on our CIS corridors. So this particular plan is specifically looking at more of the roadway corridors in the area that are currently on the CIS, or if there's an intention to add particular items to the CIS. So the rail corridors for this funding aspect or this plan is not necessarily included. There's a separate plan within the department from our rail department that handles that side of the CIS.
Mr. Pettis, Commissioner Williams-Cox, if you don't mind for a second, there's always a lot of acronyms in any kind of, anything government, but any kind of transportation planning, we seem to have our fill of them, right?
Yes.
So I think this is a good question because we often talk more generally about our transportation plans. Will you just give us 2 sentences on SIS, the Strategic Intermodal System? Just define that so that we're all clear about what we're talking about within this plan and what we're not.
Okay. As far as this plan goes for what we're looking at, this is our CIS Strategic Intermodal System. So this is a plan that's looking at our roadway systems throughout the corridors across our district. So like I-10 in your area is a primary CIS corridor. I know that Greg, he may want to speak to this momentarily, but he's been looking at other avenues throughout your district and your corridor, your area, to try to get other items on roadways on the CIS. And a lot of times these are your freight corridors for a roadway perspective as far as typically moving freight either from your seaports or from your rail hubs that could be utilized for that, not specifically in this instance, the actual rail corridor themselves, but how you would transport goods and services along those corridors.
Does it also include evacuation routes? Is that, I often hear kind of some overlap in CIS with evacuation, or is it mostly focused on the freight?
It mostly would focus on the freight and the movement, but there are some considerations. If you can look at, there's a guidance there on that brochure that's at the bottom. You see the link that's here. you can go to that guidance, and it actually lists in there in the funding guidance for SIS, it shows you some eligible items. There is criteria that's set aside that does acknowledge all those things that can be included to help get a corridor on the SIS to be a SIS facility. So there's a separate checklist, and so I can't say, no, that's not a consideration. It is, but
Yeah.
where it would weigh in that overall strategy is different.
Okay.
Madam-
Commissioner Williams-Cox, I was coming back to you, but just want to take that moment because it's always a good reminder of exactly what these different designations mean, right? But I think you're,
Yeah, I read what it meant.
Yeah.
And by its middle name, intermodal, said to me that
right.
we're not just restricting it to highways, we're looking at intermodal.
And that's why I want to come back to you real quick because the, maybe pun intended, the intersection with rail, with ports, I mean, for the freight, that is a critical component of this. So you're absolutely right to make that connection. It just wanted to, kind of have Mr. Pettis explain exactly what this portion is. So do you have any other questions or comments, ma'am?
No, I don't, but I would suggest that going forward, so we don't have to have that explanation every time, that it be included in some footnote or definition, what we're focused on, so that we don't have to spend this time re-educating.
Okay.
Madam Chair, if I could.
Yeah,
Hold
Greg,
it
go
real
ahead.
quick. And I'm blanking on the name of the company that owns the rail through the
Rail
Panhandle.
USA, Florida Gulf Atlantic?
Florida Gulf Atlantic,
Okay.
thank you. That rail line is on the SIS, correct? I should know this, but I am drawing an absolute blank.
I think so, Bryant. Are you familiar with that?
Yes,
Okay.
that portion, if not the majority of that along the Panhandle are considered a CIS rail facility.
Commissioner, that's the main line that runs through the Panhandle, but I will say that I think that is it is mostly focused in the SIS on freight traffic and not necessarily passenger rail, which I think that's where your desires lie, in the passenger rail.
Well, yes, that's not just my desires, but my constituents who keep reaching out to me. But I do know that we're already moving freight via rail. So all of that to be considered. When I say rail, I'm not just specifically talking about passenger, I'm talking about rail, period, because it requires railroad tracks to be connected, and we know that that's why we haven't had passenger rail, because of some of that disconnection, but we do have freight rail still full and in effect.
And one more thing, I'm not sure if it's beneficial or not, but I know back a few months back, there was a presentation given to this committee from Mr. Ricky Fitzgerald that was here. So I know a lot of things were brought up in that in relation to the freight and rail side. So I'm not sure, looking back at that, if there could be some things that could help answer those questions.
Good, thank you. Was that it, Commissioner Williams-Cox?
Yes.
Okay. Commissioner Minor, you put your card down. Did we get to your question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question was going to be related to passenger rail as well, the old Sunset Limited line, restoration of that, but I think there's a different avenue for us to take on that. So thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate it.
Good. Any other questions or comments? All right. I suppose I could mention this at this point. Does Crawford Highway 319, that is part of our SIS network?
No, ma'am.
No,
The
okay.
only ones we have are I-10, 319 coming down from the Georgia line down to the airport.
Okay.
We've had discussions in the past about including US 27 up to Capitol Circle, southeast, and then taking that up to the interstate. And that's, Olin mentioned that earlier. That's, I think in staff's opinion, that's probably the best chance we ever got to get any kind of funding for the intersection of Mahan and Capitol Circle, then ultimately as well as Wilani as well. That's a much larger pot of money on the SIS side than it is what we call the other arterials.
I will save a question about Crawford Highway until later, or comment on that. I knew it was a portion of 319, so thank you for that. And Mahan and Capitol Circle definitely need some help, so we'll leave that. We need a vote?
No, ma'am, this is just a...
This is just a presentation. Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you, sir, very much. All right, moving on to 7B, financial statements. Suzanne's back up.
It's the Suzanne Leck show today.
You might say that at, Suzanne, does he say that at all of our meetings?
work. Valuable work.
That shows you who's doing most of the
I
work
see
around
Greg and
there.
Jack sitting over here, you know, no kidding.
Yeah, leaning back.
Y'all had your plenty of time at the podium, oh no.
Everything, so.
Go right ahead, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Actually, I'm simply going to introduce our accountant, our CPA firm, James Moore and Company, and Andrew Ferguson, who has worked with us for the past 3 years, is here to present the information on the audit, and I'm just happy to say it's all good news. Thank you.
All right.
Mr. Ferguson,
always a
welcome
good
back.
thing.
Well, I can sit down now.
That is your report.
No, as Suzanne said, good afternoon, commissioners. My name is Andrew Ferguson. I am with the firm James Moore and Company. I'm the senior accountant on the CRTPA audit. I've been on the audit now, I think, going on 3 years, as Suzanne said. Joining me today is Ben Clark, who's the manager on the audit. Unable to be with us today is the partner on the job, Zach Shelley-For. However, on the handout you're provided, there is contact information if you have any questions for him specifically. All to say, the audit went really well this year. As always, management is a pleasure to work with. Just want to pause before we even get into the fun part and just thank management. As always, Suzanne, Greg, their staff, the City of Tallahassee accounting staff, always very receptive to our request. Obviously, as auditors, we ask a lot of questions and ask for a lot of documents. That can get time consuming. But staff has always been a pleasure to work with. They always answer questions quick to get us what we need to get the audit out. So as always, thank you. I really appreciate the smooth process that it was this year. Thank you for that. We do have a few things. I have the full audit report here. However, I recognize this is not the time probably to go word for word, nor would you want me to. So what we will be doing is if you look at the handout you have been provided, but also what's on the screen, it's the same thing. It's just going to be kind of a 30,000 foot overview of the reports. First thing we'll get into is the required communication. As a part of the audit report, we're required to issue a letter to the board, and in that it's a number of sections. First part is just going to kind of list out our responsibility in relation to the financial statement audit. As the audit firm, James Moore, we've been engaged to issue an opinion on the financial statements. It is management's responsibility. The financial statements themselves is management's responsibility. So it's a pretty important distinction. We're supposed to issue an independent opinion. Management comes up with financial statements themselves. Another section of that required communication is going to be the significant estimates and disclosures section. We're required to point out on the financial statements what on those statements is a significant estimate or disclosure. In this case, both are estimates. First is going to be your net pension liability. That's an estimate of the pension, the liability of the pension at the end of the year. That changes on any given year depending upon the inputs that is determined during the fiscal year. The second liability on the financial statements that's significant is what's called the OPEB liability. That stands for Other Post-Employment Benefit. What that is, that's retirees' health insurance liability. The retirees of the agency that stay on the health insurance is the present value of the liability that has to be brought on to the financial statements. Part of the good stuff that Suzanne alluded to here earlier, there were no significant findings or adjustments to the financial statements and nothing that was left uncorrected. In addition to that, there were no significant difficulties performing the audit, disagreements with management, anything like that. So overall, very clean audit, very, very smooth process. Next slide, please. Now we'll move from the required communication to the board to the actual audit reports. There are a number of reports that we are required to issue as a part of the audit package for the agency. The first is the one that most people are familiar with, and that's just the overall audit report on the financial statements. The most important thing to know about that is that CRTPA was issued what's called an unmodified opinion on the financial statements. And that's the cleanest, best opinion you can get. It means everything that is in the statements, the numbers, the disclosures, there's nothing materially incorrect with those numbers or with those disclosures. Second report we're required to issue is a report on internal control and compliance. That is to be in as required by governmental auditing standards. Biggest thing to know about that report, there were no material weaknesses discovered during the audit, so controls were all sound. We had no issues or findings related to controls. Third report is, as you all know, the agency is grant funded. Majority, almost all of that is coming via FDOT, but the initial funder is the U.S. Department of Transportation. Because of that, over $750,000 of federal expenditures that triggers what's called a federal single audit. And because of that, we then have to go in and do some additional tests. And then we have to issue this specific report, which is the report on compliance for major federal programs. Upshot of that report is that it was an unmodified opinion, just like the financial statement report, cleanest you can get. And I would like to point out that this year, CRTPA has now been designated as a low-risk auditee. That's something I know that management has been working towards for a number of years now. It takes a couple of years to get that designation, and this was the year they did obtain it. On our side, that's less testing. And also, it's submitted to the Federal Clearinghouse, so they see that as well. We submit the grant information. Next report is the Independent Audit Accountants Examination Report. Again, that is just, it's required as a part of Florida statutes. The biggest thing to know about that is that the agency is in compliance with the Florida statutes that require this report. And the last one is going to be the management letter that's required by the Auditor General. And in that letter, there was no modifications noted, no findings noted. All in all, a very clean report. Lastly, just want to do some financial highlights for you all before we move to questions. The first is just want to note that that top line grant revenues amount, that's $1.5 million. It's a little bit up, pretty consistent with last year. Second number, that total fund balance, $199,000. That's pretty, typically governments are zero fund balance unless they have a special revenue fund. So $199 is pretty ordinary, nothing to note there. The last thing I want to point out, there is an unrestricted deficit of $265,000. It's really not anything to be concerned about. The majority of that is due to your net pension liability, which is not something that is within the agency's control, as it has to do with pension obligations. That? Any questions?
Commissioner Minor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, it's easy to underestimate how big a heavy lift is an unmodified opinion on an audit. As someone who's had to work with auditors or CPA firm, nothing against CPA firms, but it's a tremendous amount of work,
Yes.
And so I just wanted to say it's a big thanks to Mr. Slay, the entire team on CRTPA, as well as James Moore. It means a lot to, we've spent, 10, 15 minutes on this, but that it doesn't begin to indicate how much time spent on the audit itself, as well as the day-to-day on the practices to make a clean audit happen. So thanks to everybody, really appreciate it. I'll move option one, which is to accept the financial statements.
Second.
Thank you. And we do have a quorum still, correct? Waited? No, we do not. Okay, so the executive committee took a vote to approve this, and we've referred it to the board. So is that sufficient? And we can put it back on the agenda for the next meeting if we need a vote?
I think that's what we'll do, and I'm sorry, I forgot we had that. We'll probably put it on the consent agenda for your November meeting.
So, Mr. Ferguson, you all would not need to come back. We've had the presentation.
I mean, I could do it a third time.
Okay. No, I think you'll be good. So, Commissioner Minor, if you'll withdraw your motion and second, just.
Yeah, I'll withdraw the motion.
Okay, thank you. Okay, not seeing any other questions right now. I will say you did make this presentation at the executive committee meeting, and we, I think, had a longer conversation just about some of the changes that have happened over the recent years. Correct, Commissioner Barfield? Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, I should say. We have so many titles to toss around and everything else. But that, I think, speaks to your comment, Commissioner Minor, that and what I said earlier, there has been a tremendous amount of work. I just want to add the city staff to that as well, because they work with our CRTPA staff and with James Moore on all of our financial issues, but certainly the audit, and you were very complimentary of them. And they were represented in the room as well, the city was. So just want to make sure that we highlight that. Thank you all. This is very significant. We have worked for years to get to this place, not necessarily the board members, but we had your back. You all have worked for years. So thank you, sir, very much. Appreciate it. All right. So we have one more item, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
So we are on 7C. We're moving right along, everyone. And you took the audience with you. No. Thank you all for being here very much.
I'll have
One
Mr.
of them
Burke.
was FDOT. Okay,
Mr. Burke introduce this as a project manager for the CMP update.
great.
Good afternoon, members. In the spring of this year, we actually initiated an update to our Congestion Management Process Plan, or CMP. Our current CMP was actually adopted in 2018 by you all, and essentially what it does, as its name suggests, is looks at congestion within the four-county area, but also there's a strong safety component. The folks leading the effort actually is one of our GPCs, half associates, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Gary Phillips.
Thanks, Greg. Good afternoon, Madam. Hey, good afternoon, Madam Chair, Commissioners. I'm Gary Phillips. I'm with Half and Associates, and with me today to present is Tim Smith, also with Half and Associates, and Tyrone Scorsone, who's with Kilson and Associates. We just have about 100 slides, so if you don't mind holding your questions.
We saved all our time for you. Yeah. Go right ahead.
The congestion management process, the CMP, it's a systematic and regionally accepted approach for managing congestion that provides accurate, up-to-date information on transportation system performance and assesses alternative strategies for congestion and safety that meet state and local needs. And of course, in our CRTPA area, congestion is not really an issue for 3 of the counties, so safety is an important component. I want to point out that we will identify a robust list of strategies and projects at the end of the day, but really capacity is not going to be a focus. It's more going to be the operational type improvements and safety improvements. A CMP is required in the metropolitan areas with populations exceeding 200,000, which is Tallahassee CRTPA. And it's also developed as part of an integrated part of the Metropolitan Transportation Planning process. So it both informs and receives information from the other planning documents like the LRTP or the RMP in this case, UPWP, and the TIP. And also federal regulations are now prescriptive regarding methods and approaches for the CMP. For example, you may not want to eliminate congestion. That might not be your desire because it comes at the expense of economic conditions or vitality or community livability, and they recognize that. We are following the Federal Highway recommended 8 steps for the congestion management process. So we are developing goals and objectives, developing the network that's out there, coming up with performance measures, identifying an implementation plan, the list of robust strategies, and ultimately looking at how to monitor those improvements. So why is the CMP useful? It does create a structured process for incorporating congestion issues into the Metropolitan Transportation Planning process, and it's intended to be used as an objective-driven, performance-based planning to congestion management. One potential benefit is it's more potentially cost-effective in terms of allocation and provides a mechanism for identifying short, medium, long-range issues with congestion, both on a system-wide, quarter-level, and site-specific basis. And finally, the CMP can link future elements from the planning process. So project development, information, environmental analysis can serve as a valuable starting point for identifying a project's purpose and need and for looking at alternative analysis. The scope of services that we are working under has 9 tasks. Each of those tasks, except for number 1, has a deliverable element associated with it. I won't go through each one. Tim Smith's going to talk about tasks 2, 3, and 4, and then Tyrone's going to talk about task 5, and we have not started on task 6 through 9. Ultimately, the schedule is a 16-month contract or schedule for this project. We have coordinated with the Technical Coordinating Committee, as well as the TAC Committee, and of course with you all today. We'll continue to do that throughout
next year with deliverables, as I mentioned, with the final report and presentation in September approximately of next year. So with that, let me turn it over to Tim Smith.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gary, and good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board and staff. I'd like to start, so some of this will be a little review of what Gary said with a little more details, but I found this picture when starting this project and thought it was a fun picture. So if you probably can't read it where you're at, but if you read the caption for this picture, I found it's from the State Archives. It reads, "Traffic jam caused by crowd waiting to see Gone with the Wind at the State Theater in Tallahassee in 1961. So congestion in Tallahassee is not new. They did not have the CMP process in 1961, however. So as Gary mentioned, it is required by federal statute. It's important I want to just review the actual language because that's, we need to make sure when we do this that we cover these important parts that the regulations require. So CMP must address congestion management through a process that provides for safe and effective integrated management and operation of multimodal transportation. So it's a process that looks at safe and effective management.
Excuse me, Madam Chair.
Yes.
If I remember right, Gone with the Wind was released in 1939 or something, and that photo's from 1961?
Yeah, it might have
That's a good example of congestion, of those people waiting in line all that long all the time.
They were box
wanna point
office
that out.
records, right? Maybe it was the re-release where they colorized it or something.
You are in a board meeting with folks who like a lot of details. We pay attention, so that's a good It's a good catch, Commissioner Minor. We're just showing we're paying attention. Mr. Smith,
know.
go right ahead.
Good to know. This next slide, it's important to, to remember that, or to point out that the CMP process is a process. So a lot of times we're looking at and talking about these plans for the MPOs, such as your regional mobility plan or your TIP. And those tend to be standalone plans that you go through the planning process, you adopt it, and then that's it, then you implement it. But the congestion management process is a process. It's continuous, it's ongoing. And it does feed into those other standalone plans of the It does feed into your RMP. It can influence and help your TIP and also one of the things when looking at identifying goals and objectives for this 2023 update of your CMP, one of the first places we looked was the current or the most recent regional mobility plan, which is the 2045 connections RMP for the CRTPA. So that plan actually has 9 goals. What we did was we didn't want to just copy and reuse those same 9 goals, but looked at the goals that the RMP identified as important, that had the most to do with congestion, that were most appropriate for the congestion management process. We identified 4 of those 9 goals. They deal with multimodalism, connectivity, access, and safety. Then through the working group, we've identified and developed 4 corresponding goals for the CMP that are consistent with and correspond with them, but they aren't the same goals verbatim or word for word. So your current draft 4 goals for the CMP update are there on the right column. They are incorporating multimodal options and strategies to reduce congestion in the CMP, increasing connectivity of the network, providing additional person trip alternatives, providing increased access to key destinations and modes of travel, and number 4, providing safety improvements through the CMP process. A lot about safety today, so that definitely is a component of the congestion management process. Gary also mentioned performance measures. An important part of the congestion management process is finding ways, after you identify your goals and objectives, what is it that you want to accomplish, you have to find a way to measure that, to measure whether you're making progress in meeting your goals and objectives. You do that through the use of performance measures. So the Federal Highway lists a few examples or reasons or purposes of performance. There's 5 listed in the Federal Highway Guidance. Those purposes are listed to the left. And again, go back to the CFRs. What is required is that we include methods to monitor and evaluate the performance of the multimodal transportation. Performance measures help us do that. They help us check in periodically at certain intervals and see if we're meeting our goals and objectives, typically through data collection. The last 4 slides, we'll just go over, again, the draft goals and then the objectives that we developed. The performance measures are still in progress. We're developing those and refining those as we start to look at the data that's available and what makes the most sense for this area. So for goal 1, again, was to incorporate multiple options. Some of the draft objectives we've identified with the working group so far: reducing non-recurring congestion, achieving the adopted level of service, a way of letter grading how the roadway is operating as far as congestion levels, and then increasing the percentage of work trips made by other modes. Goal number 2, increasing connectivity to the network. We've got a draft objective of promoting multimodal connectivity through facility enhancement, creating additional multimodal facilities in the network, vital for the roadway network.
Mr. Smith, I'm sorry to interrupt. Could you move the microphone down just a hair? When you look down, it's just hard to hear.
Sorry.
But I look at my notes all the time too, so you got to do what you got to do. So
I'll read the screen.
yeah, thank you.
Goal 3 was providing increased access to key destinations. So your objectives there are implementing alternative access improvements. Access, when you think about access, is typically how the roadway or the transportation network connects to land use development. So this will be increasing access to land. Improving access to areas identified as existing or future residential and/or employment clusters, and utilizing context-sensitive solutions and complete street strategies to better match facilities with surroundings. So making sure that your roadway, your transportation facilities are good matches for the development estimate. And finally, goal 4, providing safety improvements through the CMP process. The 4 objectives we have, draft objectives identified so far, are reducing the number of automobile crashes, reducing the number of crashes involving non-motorized person trips, identifying crash hotspots, and strategies to improve safety, and then finally reducing the number of. That's a quick high-level overview of the process we've gone through so far to develop the goals, objectives, and performance measures. With that, I'll answer.
Any questions? We always know there's a lot packed into the goals and objectives, but it has to be done. All of these different steps, they help us coordinate planning, but also help us qualify for funding. I mean, it's critical steps, so thank you very much. Yes.
With that, I'll turn the time over to Tyrone, who's going to go into some details of the next step.
Okay. Welcome, sir.
Good afternoon, Commissioners, Madam Chair. Talk about some of the work that we've already completed. We've done a lot of work over the course of the summer, meeting with all 4 counties' respective representatives to review an analysis network. So part of the congestion management process, like most transportation plans, requires identifying a study area. In this case, it's a study network. The study network that we identified is predominantly based on available data to us. We're going to then take the additional step of measuring congestion and safety on this study network. Each one of the individual county networks was vetted with representatives from that county over the course of the summer, predominantly in the months of July and August. Tim finished up with a slide on safety performance measures. We're going to do a pretty deep dive into safety. We're going to we have a duality to it. We're going to have 2 approaches. We have a hotspot analysis and a systemic safety approach. Our hotspot analysis is going to largely look at crash rates. We'll do crash rates based on total volume. Some of you are familiar with the AADT on the roadway network, and then the prevalence of crashes. Our systemic safety approach will identify areas of concern based on roadway characteristics associated with certain crash types. Focusing on the hotspot analysis first, crash rates that we're developing now to be consistent with practice in our industry are based on 5-year rolling averages. So the years 2017 through 2021, the analysis ultimately is going to result in a prioritized list of both intersections that have high crash rates, as well as segments that have high crash rates. Lastly, part of the data acquisition process, Signal 4 analytics. I don't want to speak a lot of transportation jargon while I'm up here. There's another safety database called CARS, which is another acronym, both of which have crash reports. So these are the same crash reports that law enforcement submit. And within the crash reports, we can extract information on causality, what's causing the crashes, take a little bit of a dive into the problem. I said it was a duality. The second of these is a little bit more predictive. We'll look at emphasis areas. So there are a little over a dozen emphasis areas that have been identified. They're safety emphasis areas. They're part of a strategic highway safety plan. Safety emphasis areas is a common theme amongst transportation agencies elsewhere. Interested, I can share more with you what the emphasis areas are. A lot of this stuff is online and available on the World Wide Web, but I don't mind getting into that level of detail. We'll select from that list of safety emphasis areas, which is very comprehensive, covers everything, a handful to sort of further focus on for our CRTPA boundary. We'll then take a deeper dive. So I put a crash diagram up, a crash tree diagram up here to kind of show a little bit of what this deeper dive will entail. If we were looking specifically at the predominance of roadway departures at horizontal curves, we would identify all of the crashes that fit that criteria. Then we'd determine if they were happening in rural places or in urban places. We would look at the type of median that was there, which is that third row, whether it was divided, undivided. And in each respective step, you're looking for which one has the most crashes. Then you get down into the number of lanes and the posted speed limit. You somewhat have narrowed down locations within our network that are likely to have incidents. Take an additional step, getting a little bit deeper in the dive by looking at risk factors. So at the locations, there's going to be associated risk factors that have a lot to do with the roadway geometry. So risk factors include stuff like curve radius, lane widths, the presence of curb and gutter would be one, the grade of the road. A lot of times road grade will block your line of sight. We'll help develop thresholds for these risk factors, then identify those locations that these apply to for further investigation. Prioritize locations, and it's too far ahead. Based on the risk factors, and sort of obviously, those places with the most risk factors will be the ones that make the prioritized list. So it'll be a duality of efforts in looking at the actual data that we already have to develop crash rates for segments and signalized intersections, and the systemic safety approach that I just described to help us identify safety projects as part of the overall congestion management process. I'll pause there, Gary, in case there's any questions.
I'll just ask one quick question. Within the analysis, are you looking at crashes involving bicyclists or pedestrians, or is this just crash data involving vehicles?
Commissioner Dozer, this is the somewhat bad news. So yes, but.
Always.
In the development of a crash rate, in your denominator, you need to account for total volume. And we don't have counts for pedestrian and bicycle volume. So what you end up doing, you put vehicular volume in your denominator, and when you have such a small number of ped and bike crashes, your number gets washed out in comparison to automobile accidents in the numerator. And then consequently, they typically don't make it up that prioritized list. But as part of the systemic safety approach, I believe we can choose both pedestrian and separately bike crashes to identify those areas where they're happening, and then look at the roadway geometry, posted speed limit, and some of those other factors that I mentioned earlier there, but the crash rates themselves haven't traditionally been a good way identifying pedestrian and bike crashes.
That's helpful, and if I'm going to extrapolate on the last comment, or the previous comment you just made, we have talked extensively about bike and pedestrian incidents and crashes and tracking those. We could, at some point, look at the data more holistically. That's what I'm hearing?
Yeah, and we're
Karen?
doing that now. Actually, Jack been going through probably the last month
Okay.
or two, digging back through the bicycle and pedestrian crashes, and I believe provided that to Tyrone's group to go through that. It gets incorporated, but I think when we're getting into the geeky part of this, but when you start talking about crash rates, Tyrone's exactly right. That's not tailor-made for bike and ped crash.
And that's why I asked the question, because that process of analysis that you went through, which was very helpful, all of the different factors and drilling down to the highest need, highest priorities, I wasn't hearing anything that would relate to bike and ped, but that's good. We've got the data on
They will definitely
it.
be there.
Okay. Thank you, sir, very much. Anything else? All right, we're good.
Sorry, one more
Yeah.
slide. Yeah. So I was going
Gary,
to say,
thank
you know, we were at a conference recently, and the micromobility discussion came up about, you know, the e-bikes and scooters and all that stuff. And really, the bottom line is the infrastructure is not designed for that system yet. It was designed for vehicular traffic, and we're still kind of catching up to that. And so from a data collection perspective, we still don't have good information on that. But we're getting there. And the bottom line is choices, right? People have more choices whether they want to ride their vehicle or ride their electric bike, which apparently now you can go 30, 40 miles without even pedaling. So that sounds pretty good for us as we get older. So next steps, I mean, Tyrone and his team have been doing the heavy lifting, collecting the data and analyzing it. We're getting to the point now that we're moving on to actually putting together this data catalog. That's the next part. And then the fun part of identification of those, I say fun, critical congested corridors and safety hotspots. They're located in the 4-county area from a regional tier, from a corridor specific location, and then also recurring and non-recurring congestion is a big component as well. And we'll take those strategies and projects and put it into an implementation plan, make sure that it goes into the right, whether it's the LRTP or the PIP, et cetera. And we'll report that all out at the end of the September, August of next year and present it back to you guys. So looking forward to coming back to you.
Fantastic.
Any other comments or questions?
I'm looking at these guys first. Any others? Or I'll come to you, Commissioner Minor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Quick question. How do you factor, when it comes to the identification of CMP strategies and projects, how do you factor in cost of a project when it comes to prioritizing those? For example, you might have one project that has, that is less safe than 5 others, but they're equal in terms of the safety improvements if the projects were made, but the one project is much more expensive than the 5. How do you have an algorithm you use to kind of factor in the cost and evaluate the prioritization of those?
Typically, Commissioner, the standard ways to do a cost-benefit analysis, and that weighs into it is, you know, the number of crashes you may prevent and how that compares against the cost to actually construct the improvement. That makes sense?
Okay.
And I don't know, I mean, so Tyrone's presentation too, that some of that's kind of cutting edge stuff. It's not stuff that's been done before, but predicting locations where you might have safety issues is kind of new stuff. And based on the design characteristics or the curvature, et cetera, the engineering components, if you will, of that roadway, this is an interesting way of kind of stopping something that might happen in the future, as opposed to reacting to what the current data has.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Typically, with the project list together too, we don't necessarily take cost as that first priority cut. It's more looking at, you know, what are our worst spots that we have, and then focus on how to fix those.
Okay, great. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other questions? All right, gentlemen, thank you all. A lot of great information. Look forward to see the results next year. Thank you. Yes.
Quickly, the data that they're generating sounds familiar to the SS4A for a reason. So the data that they're generating, we're going to be incorporating into that project, so we don't have this duality going on between the two projects.
Thank you for mentioning that, Jack. That was more eloquent than what I was saying earlier, but we have so much more data now. We have a lot of studies, a lot of consultants, and I had trusted, and you just, you know, spoke to this, and so did Greg. you all are incorporating all of this together, and that is really great. We have a better picture of our transportation system, all modes, than perhaps we ever have before. Okay, great. Thank you again. And we don't need a vote on this, which is good, because we don't have enough people to vote on this. All right, so we are done with our agenda items for today. We will go to our FDOT report. Brian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The department has 3 resurfacing projects that are coming up. We're having virtual project updates. I've placed the handouts at each of your locations. Since you have those, I won't go into painstaking detail on these, but one of them's on US 19 in Jefferson County, and we have 2 in Leon County on Woodville Highway and Mahan Drive. But again, these are our resurfacing projects, and we try to incorporate as many other improvements as we can in these projects. The information provided will let you know when the plan detail information will be placed on our website. And we would appreciate your review of that, your staff's review, and provide any comments you may have.
Thank you.
Yes. I submitted comments probably a year ago to Carrie Harrell. Just want to make sure that those are still in there and ready to go.
They're in there, but in what capacity was Ms. Harrell when you submitted them? She has moved quite a lot.
She was in charge. That's what I know.
Okay. Well, she's still in charge. But,
I'm glad y'all clarified that, because that could have gone a lot of different ways. All right.
She was the one that put out the email.
which project? And I'll make sure.
Oh, 19.
Okay.
Jefferson 19. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Anything else? Oh, Commissioner Richardson,
Just a
thank you.
quick question, Bryant. We've been discussing the widening of Orange Avenue from Adams to Capitol Circle Southwest, but recently there's been some resurfacing and shoulder work done along that same route from, I guess it starts east of Spring Hill Road and goes west. I've had people ask me if we're looking at the 4-laning of Orange Avenue along that corridor, why was the resurfacing and shoulder work?
Yes, sir. That's a very common question we receive. and the answer is not something that places the department in the best light, but the reality is the actual construction of that 4-lane is unknown.
Okay.
So we can't not maintain our system just because we have a future 4-lane that may be coming and we don't have a set year.
Okay.
So you'll see us maintain that roadway as if, there is no 4-laning coming, but just as soon as it comes in our work program,
Right.
you may see some deferral of our maintenance activities.
Okay. All right. I've just been asked that question by neighbors, by business owners along the route, and I didn't have an answer for them.
We're hoping to fund it as soon as possible so we can, stop investing in a road that needs improvement.
Right.
Well, and just to follow up on that, to give you the scale that we're talking about, the typical rule of thumb for a road resurfacing, especially like Orange Avenue, is 15 years. We still have to go through design, which we're in now, right-of-way acquisition, and then construction. So, it's not likely that we'll see that road 4-lane for the next 8 to 10 years. Because it's probably, at the rate we're going right now, that's probably a $200 or $300 million project. But realistically, it's probably a $150 million project or better. Yeah. So that's. I've gotten some questions the other day about it. I think right now the estimates are $71 million for right-of-way and construction. And those are probably a year old, so it's probably double that right now. But that's, as Bryant said, they can't just stop maintaining the roads.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Commissioner Richardson, I think that is a really good question, because we know transportation projects take a really long time, but it's probably good for the residents to know that maintenance continues during that time. That's, even though we all want it widened, I think that is a good thing that FDOT continues on that.
Oh, yeah. Sure.
Any other questions for Brian? Okay, well, I'll just make a quick comment here. I was going to mention this earlier about Crawfordville Highway and 319 at the Leon County portion. And Commissioner Minor, please chime in if you've got any comments. I'm going back to our commission meeting of last week. And I'll first ask Greg, did we get any official communication from the Leon County Commission?
I've not seen anything.
All right, well, then I'll just get ahead of this a bit. It would have come to you, I believe. Okay. Yeah. Chairman Proctor brought up an issue about widening 319 from the Leon County line into town. And he very much wanted to send a letter to the board, which we eventually did agree to, encouraging us to make this a priority and to push it forward and to advance fund it. For my colleagues on the CRTPA board, Commissioner Minor, Commissioner Maddox, we spent some time in discussion that this project has been a priority, that it was phased so that we could get funding, that Wakulla County, it gave a lot of props to Wakulla. If Wakulla can get this done, why can't Leon? I will say that. And we kind of brought it, I mean, working together and working through this board, that we have made this a priority. I've mentioned it at the board meeting in the past. Greg and I met with Representative Schoaf, goodness, that might have been 2 months ago now, to discuss this very project. He was at our last board meeting, and I guess I'll say for the record, prior to being a member of this board, Commissioner Messersmith, we met and discussed this because there's a lot of desire in Wakulla and Leon County.
Absolutely.
To get these sections finished. So I just wanted to, and again, Commissioner Minor, if you have anything to add from that discussion, I wanted to bring that in to the meeting because if you heard that discussion, at first, it may sound like this board was not making it a priority or there was something else we could do, but I think by the end of it, we really got some clarity that we have been working together. We appreciate FDOT's work on this. We know we're making progress, and it had to be phased. So that letter is forthcoming, and at the end, I think we just took it as added support for what we were doing.
Yeah.
Commissioner Minor, did I miss anything there?
Madam Chair, you captured that accurately, to my understanding.
Thank you.
And just for everyone's information, it is actually currently under design. I believe for this fiscal year, will be going under design. Right, you remember?
It's funded for design.
Yeah.
Those two segments are funded for updating the design this year.
So it is moving forward. But it's, as anything else, it's a slow pace. I think the one advantage we may have with that ultimately, I don't think the right-of-way needs are as great for something like Orange Avenue.
Yeah.
So that may help it in the long run, but it still has to go through that design phase before it can go any further.
And the right-of-way needs aren't as challenging as where we go through Crawfordville and some of the other areas within Wakulla County as well. So it was important to, yeah. Well, since we know that letter is forthcoming and there have been questions by Leon County and Commissioner Messersmith, you let me know, it seems like both Wakulla County and Leon County boards, it may be good to give an update to our colleagues. Could we just get a really short update? Not any time, right? I mean, sure. Yeah, when time permits. And then our county administrators can forward it to the board in case there are any other questions. Sound good?
I can respond back to that letter when we get an update.
That's perfect. If we can include Wakulla County Commission, that'd be great. Okay. Anything else? No? Okay.
On discussion items when we're up to that point.
We had executive director's report, and then, but if you don't mind, we'll go ahead with that, Greg. Just, yeah. Please, go ahead. Okay.
Chairperson's prerogative.
Two quick things. The Leon County Tallahassee Planning Department, Sustainable Tallahassee, Ride On Together, and are putting together an e-bike expo on Wednesday, October 26th from 5:30 to 8:30 p.m. at the Anita Favors Plaza. And just wanted to remind everybody about that upcoming expo. You can take test rides on e-bikes with helmets. And hear from e-bike owners and riders. So that's the one thing. The other thing I wanted to wish our chair a happy birthday today.
Oh,
Is today your birthday?
it is. Thank you, Commissioner
you
Minor.
sing?
No, you really don't. But you can if you want to. Thank you, Commissioner Minor. Appreciate that.
On my calendar? Let me look. Hold on, you just hold on.
I appreciate you, Vice Chair. Yes. All right. right, you totally threw me off there. See, I'm going to take a step back, and Mary Kay Faulkner, thank you for, you must have emailed many of us, because I had the same flyer pulled up to make the same announcement, so thank you, Commissioner Minor, for doing that, yes. Appreciate both of those sentiments. And is there any, so we're kind of in Commissioner discussion time right now, is there any other comments right now?
I just
Yes,
want to
ma'am,
make
go ahead.
a quick comment. At the Opera House on the Courthouse Circle, our hawk was installed today, and it looks fabulous. Everybody is so happy, so thank you, DOT, CRTPA, anybody else that was involved in that. That's going to be great. It was backed up. Yeah, thank you. That was it.
Fantastic. All right. Well, I have one more comment, but I'm going to let you go first.
Okay.
Give your
that's fine.
report, yeah.
Just a couple of things. The ever-evolving saga that is the NIMS Middle School crossing, something that near and dear to Commissioner Richardson's heart. We've had a few twists and turns over the last few months. If you recall, back at your March meeting, we had given you an update that the department was going to move or try to move forward with installing a couple of overhead signals similar to what we're doing on Adams Street down south of Orange Avenue. At the time, the cost estimate on that was about $750,000 for design and construction. Since then, we got a call from DOT in the last couple of weeks. Their estimate has gone up to $1.2 million, and there was fear that that wasn't going to be enough. So we kind of stepped back and regrouped a little bit, and actually had a meeting this morning with DOT staff and City of Tallahassee staff, and are trying to work to install some rectangular rapid flashing beacons similar to what's around Thomasville Road, probably at the intersection of Holton and Orange Avenue. So we think that we can get done significantly cheaper and significantly quicker. So there's still some work to be done, working with city staff and DOT staff to get some agreements in place. Hopefully DOT actually has some of the RRFBs, or they're called, on hand. If not, there's about a 16 to 20-week lead time to get those, but Mike Lewis with the safety office was fairly confident they had some that could go ahead and be installed sooner rather than later. So I'm hoping by our meeting next month, we will have some definitive information as to when they're going to get installed.
Yes, please.
And I went by, just specifically, I'm of course by there all the time, but the interesting thing with how they've got the campus arranged, they've got two entrances from Orange Avenue. One is for cars and buses to come in. The buses go left, the cars go right to pick up kids, and then the cars exit on the far end. I'm not sure where those kids enter and exit from Orange Avenue, because at either entrance, it's going to put them interfacing with vehicles.
They don't. And Jack and Greg were actually on the field visit, but from what I understand, when school lets out, the kids go out the little porte-cochere, or whatever you want to call it, where the buses load, out to Pasco Street and go up
to the traffic light.
They're not really the issue, because as you mentioned before, there's a crossing guard there that pushes them apart or pushes them across. I think he's there for maybe 20 or 30 minutes after school is out. What happens is kind of the stragglers, or when they come out, they're flowing kind of all over the place, going to the, was it Don's Meat Store, I think, across the street?
Across the street.
And then the apartment complexes and the houses kind of northeast or northwest of the school. So that's where we're thinking probably Holton is about as close to the point as we can get. There's also a Star Metro stop there as well.
Right.
Some of the kids, as we all know, they're probably still going to cross wherever they want to, but we've done the best we can to give them a safe environment to cross, whether or not they choose to use it. But we think that at least they'll go down the sidewalk and cross over. Right?
Yeah, and I think Dr. Bolden will be persistent in them being safe.
Right.
If we put that crossing in place. Because right now, some of them, they try to dart across without going to the traffic light. That's what the problem has been.
A couple other things, going back to the new bipartisan infrastructure law, one of the programs that came out of that is called Reconnecting Communities. It was originally designed, and And one of the examples was used was I-4 in Tampa, where it bifurcated some traditionally low-income and African-American neighborhoods. They've since, as the program has developed, they actually have expanded it to make it a bit more broad-based. So we submitted, along with Blueprint, Star Metro, and Leon County, jointly submitted a Reconnecting Communities grant for Tharp Street to go ahead and try to get a PD&E started on that. The PD&E will actually include a 30% design plan phase as well. So our thought is the program's actually a 5-year program. If we're successful on this round, we would eventually try to get the project through both project development, environmental study, or PD&E, and design as well. We submitted that on October 13th, I believe.
Yeah, that was the due date.
Yeah. So we submitted that. Probably will know something in the March timeframe. They haven't really announced any award notifications yet, but I think we put together a really good application on that. Greg Burke headed that up with a lot of help from Blueprint and Leon County, again, Star Metro staff. So if we're successful with that, there's some steps we would have to go through to get at the CRTPA to get lab certified to do PD&Es. We've actually done that before. It's just been a few years, but we think that's probably our best opportunity to move Tharp Street from, and I should clarify, from Ocala to Capitol Circle, move that project forward in some way, shape, or form.
Great.
And then just real quickly, I want to thank, shout out to Mike Lewis from District 3 Safety. He provided us with some of the signs you see behind you here. We'll be using those at some of our Safe Streets for All public involvement activities that we do. So, or if you need to borrow one, we'll rent them out for a small fee. Got to make the money back somehow.
Nice.
Madam Chair, that's all I have.
All right. Anything else? All right. This is it's an odd time for me. This is my last meeting as chair of this board. Last meeting after 12 years serving on this board. Whatever happens 3 weeks from today, do hope to continue working with you all. But I did want to take just a moment to say that the arc of this organization and what I've learned in transportation planning over the last 12 years is substantial. It is deep. We make a lot of jokes about, you really, and thank you all, particularly the diehards who kept going today till the end. That you have to look at the details. I mean, if we don't get this right, we lose funding to other areas. And that was one thing that was happening in the early years on this board. A lot of us know that for a multitude of reasons, we saw more funding going west of us and into other areas. The work that has happened in recent years has, and we've mentioned it today through financial reports, through a lot of different things, but it has been quite the experience, the education, and I'm very proud of working with you all of you, and I'm looking at Yolanda too up there, and seeing how committed you are to our region and to really improving transportation, safety, all types, and how much you care about the community is represented in the detail and the work you do on these projects. Sometimes we get what surprises us, we get a lot of public speakers, a lot of public engagement. Sometimes we have rooms, more often than not, rooms like this. But I just really wanted to thank you all. And one way or another, this is hometown, and I will absolutely be invested. But this is, maybe surprises some people, but this is really one area that I am extremely passionate about and committed to, because I see what, the deep work that we do, how much it can benefit and how critical it is. Even if we have to wait 8 to 10 years for a road or something like that, we know it. That's why it's important. So I just wanted to say that. And Madam Vice Chair, you're up next. And thank you very much. Appreciate it. And that's it. We're adjourned.
Okay.
She got